It's the Sports Peninsula podcast. Coming up, we continue our coverage of the 2023 NFL draft prospect classes as we look at the tight ends. This is a deep prospect class, but are there any first-round picks in the group? And will the Detroit Lions be in play for a tight end in April? We'll give our thoughts next. Now, here's your Sports Peninsula team. Welcome, everybody, to the Sports Peninsula podcast. My name is Dave Drzezinski. Drew, it is February 23rd, a Thursday evening, 2023, and we're talking NFL draft prospects. Our series continues this week with the tight end prospects, with a focus on who we think is going to get drafted and where we think they're going to get drafted in terms of their draft slot, and also take a look at where specifically the Detroit Lions might be looking at a tight end. If they are, where would they maybe take one? We'll give our thoughts on that. First, I want to introduce Coach Andy Shield of the Marine City Mariners. Coach, how you doing this evening?
Drew, doing well. We're thawing out from Ice Storm 2023. Fortunately, never lost power here. We're among the fortunate. Did get some heavy ice, but all is safe and sound here in northwest Macomb County.
Very good to hear, Coach. Very good to hear. You know, this is a prospect group here, the tight ends. And, you know, we'll talk about the Lions to preface it before we jump into it. They trade TJ Hockenson last year right at the deadline and they got a second and third round pick from the Vikings this year for it. Now, you look at the roster and they have James Mitchell and Zylstra and also Wright are free agents. It does necessitate they're going to have to add to the roster. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the draft, but realistically, you've got a second-year guy in Mitchell who didn't play a lot last year. What are your thoughts on where the Lions you think might strike while the iron's hot on this one?
Yes, I think, Drew, that it's a nice position group towards the top end, and there's a lot of overall prospects that are going to get NFL camps and are going to be on NFL rosters next year, contributing in games, regular season games. As far as where we fall in line in regards to priority with tight end, again, that's an Allen Park, that's the secrets of Allen Park, so to speak. But, they could look as early as the first round if they really felt that they needed to make that kind of talent acquisition from a tight end. It could be in the second round or the third round pick. It could go into day three. It really is difficult to kind of really put a thumb completely on. We saw them, as you had mentioned, trade TJ Hockenson, who was a Pro Bowl tight end, finishing the season with the Minnesota Vikings. Towards the end of his rookie deal, he's looking to make some money.
Yeah.
It was not likely that we were going to retain his services. Why we would hit the reset button with getting a prospect, in this draft, is there a prospect better than what TJ Hockenson was when we selected him those years ago? No. I don't think there is a prospect trending that way. Now, is there a better player than TJ Hockenson? TJ Hawkinson's one of the 10 best tight ends in the league. He's probably more than that even. But he is not someone that is definitively going to change your fortunes. If anything, once we traded TJ Hockenson, what started happening here with the Lions?
That's a good point.
So, let's not think because we have vacated a first overall pick, via trade this past year, knowing he wasn't going to be coming back anyway, and think that we need to replace that tight end with a first round pick. That we, had some guys produce that are going to be free agents. Some or most of those guys will return. So, this is a position group I think we very well could be selecting from, but I don't think it's going to be day one, that's for sure.
Well, let's jump into it, Coach. That's a perfect segue. Let's talk about these tight end prospects, and let's first talk about Michael Mayer, the junior from Notre Dame. What are your thoughts on him?
Michael Mayer is pretty much the consensus number one tight end on most draft boards. As you had mentioned, 6'4", 251-pound, third-year junior from the University of Notre Dame. He was a four-star high school prospect, highly coveted guy. He is the most pro-ready, and his athletic profile falls within kind of the same parameter as that of a Mark Andrews of the Baltimore Ravens. Picture Mark Andrews, and you can picture what Michael Mayer looks and plays like. He's extremely effective at both as a pass catcher and receiver, and as an inline blocker. Excellent in-traffic receiver, 50-50 balls. His catch point is very, very good and very, very productive. He has great ball skills. He's a clutch go-to target. He's that guy you want on third and fourth down to look for. He makes those plays. He's sure-handed in those kinds of situations. That's what he has proven down in South Bend, at least. Drew, you know, that's what he is. This guy right here, Michael Mayer, is your do it all, ready to go, starting tight end one in the 2023 season. Tight end, Drew. That's what Michael Mayer is, and that's why he's number one on most boards.
You know, I like him a lot, Coach, and you know, there's obviously there's some buyer beware with everybody. But what are your thoughts on where we should be a little cautious with Mr. Mayer?
Well, he's a good athlete. He's a real good athlete, but he's not a freak athlete. He's not somebody that's just going to has a catch radius that's like a 2.5 car garage like Calvin Johnson. He's not going to stretch a field like Michael Pitts, can do. Or how we saw Antonio Gates and Tony Gonzalez do throughout their careers. He's a two-way tight end. He's both a receiver and a blocker, but he's not Rob Gronkowski. People call him Baby Gronk, but that's easy to do. He's not just going to be able to use what he's been able to do innately at Notre Dame and throughout high school, and that's just a body up defensive backs and lighter linebackers, to get these free and easy releases. It's going to be a tougher thing for him, and that is something that he's going to see right away. He will struggle with bump and press coverage a little bit as that result. He's a possession style receiver. Like I said, he's not going to stretch the field. He's not one of these tight ends that's going to be a guy that's going to get 75, 80-yard touchdowns, regularly. He's more of a possession guy, but, that's within the framework of most, offenses anyway. The tight end is a possession style receiver, so that shouldn't affect him too much. He's an all-around type of target. Or he's not an all-around type of target. He is going to be a guy where if you really need third and long, big conversion, cover 20 yards, on the next play type, Michael Mayer might be coming off the field.
That makes sense. And Coach, great synopsis. My 2 cents on this: Michael Mayer is a very good tight end. I agree with you. He's a late first round talent in my view. Now, the Lions are picking 18th, but you touched on it before we even jumped into this. What did the Lions do after they traded TJ Hockenson? Well, they went on to win. They went on 7-2 run. And that's not a knock on Hockenson, but what that's saying is it's not a position of desperation. It is a position of need in terms of depth for the Lions and maybe for a starter as well. To me, they're not a team that drafts Mayer in the first round is a team that's pretty talent rich and doesn't have any glaring holes, Coach, or has an offense that's really predicated around the tight end. The Lions don't have that offense, and they have significant needs on the other side of the ball, at least on day one, in my view. So to me, Michael Mayer is not an option for the Lions on day one. He could be an option for some teams, and I think he'll be a very good tight end. But in the comparisons to Mark Andrews, I've heard that and I've read that, and I like him, but Not in the first round. I don't personally like him in the first round. If he became a Mark Andrews, good for him. That's awesome. That's great. I think more. I see Pat Freiermuth here a little bit more, maybe with a little better, little more productivity on offensively with pass catching. But I think he's a very good blocker, and I think they're similar. And Meyer might have a little bit more speed, but we're going to see what happens, right? Interesting prospect, no question about that. Now we're going to take a look at the next prospect, Coach, and this guy's interesting. Luke Musgrave, the senior out of Oregon State. Talk about him.
He's kind of climbed the charts. He wasn't a guy. He was considered a top 10 tight end prospect, but has really climbed the charts through some productivity that he had this year and some things that are really kind of really jumping off the sheet for a lot of scouts. Luke Musgrave is a 6'6", 250-pound senior from Oregon State. Was a top high school athlete in Oregon. Was all-state in multiple sports, all-state in football, all-state in lacrosse. He was an all-state athlete in track. He was a state champion on the ski team at his high school in Oregon. So he's kind of a unique athlete. Very much like Michael Mayer, he can align in the full gambit of tight end alignments. He's scheme versatile. And that really bumps him ahead of maybe a couple of other prospects that have garnered maybe a little more attention than what Luke Musgrave, has. He can line up at the Y. He can line up at the H. He can line up in a slot. He can do, multiple things. So that in motion, very valuable to an offensive coordinator. He's a big target. He high points the ball well, similar to Michael Mayer. He's a little bigger than Mayer. He's a good vertical route runner. He can kind of stretch the field a little bit. And at 6'6", 250, you would expect him to do so. He has the speed to be a real difficult cover for a linebacker. So, much like Michael Mayer, Luke Musgrave is a very, very tough receiver to cover out of the tight end position. A little bit different where Mayer is more of the possession guy, the clutch, target him on third and fourth down no matter what. Musgrave is a little bit more of a downfield guy. Probably less catches, but more yards per catch.
Now, I admittedly, Coach, haven't seen a lot of Luke Musgrave. Heard a lot about him from you, and then I've seen some. I've done a little scouting on him, but what I did really like his upside, no question about that. I think some of the drawbacks that you're going to touch on are maybe just a lot to do with just didn't start a lot of games early in his career, but take over. What do you see as a possible concern?
Well, yeah, and that kind of separates him from Michael Mayer, David, is that he's not as dynamic of a route runner. He's going to be asked to do a couple of things, and that's going to be how he asserts himself within the scheme. He's going to make plays off of the things that he does. Mayer will do whatever is asked of him and will get open to do so, where Musgrave is a little more limited in that area. He's not as dynamic of a route runner. He's not as physical of a blocker as Michael Mayer either. He's more of a wall seal guy. And that's valuable too. I mean, you don't need to be an absolute line redistrict repurpose guy.
Mm-hmm.
You can be a chip and wall and seal type player, but that is what Luke Musgrave is. So he's not going to be a super physical mover of the line of scrimmage. Pad level will be a concern. I mean, we talked about that with offensive tackles, and even with some interior offensive linemen. When you're 6'6", it's tough to be the low man, and he will struggle with that a little bit. And until he really kind of gets his NFL, big boy, professional strength profile, that's going to be a problem for him.
Yeah, this is a guy, and one of the concerns is, he's very strong, and you said he's got speed. He doesn't necessarily separate like you'd like, but he's definitely got speed. And you love his size and strength. I mean, he's great in the weight room, and he's one of those guys. I think when you watch the combine, he's going to impress you. I really believe that.
Oh
I
yeah.
think that the challenge, and the challenge is going to be on scouts is, will that translate to the field? Does he play with that kind of strength? And I think those are the questions. I personally don't have the answer for that. I haven't seen enough of him really, so he's got a lot. He's intriguing. I don't know if I'm thinking the Lions. I'm not sure that's the guy. And I'll be honest with you. I've got a guy in mind.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Luke Musgrave's going to be one of the 4 tight ends taken off the board first, just because he can stretch the field and he is a dynamic receiving target. He's going to make plays for somebody. He's not the type of style tight end I think we're looking for. We ask our tight ends to block and be a factor in that run game. And then they need to be able to separate in the route and the route and stem from the route tree accordingly. We're not going to run the offense through our tight ends, but Luke Musgrave is probably still not quite the type of tight end we're looking for.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, Coach. No question about that. But I'll tell you what, this next gentleman I'm intrigued by, and I know you are too. Let's talk about Darnell Washington, the junior out of Georgia.
Big Darnell Washington. Now, Georgia featured 3 tight ends, and really Eric Gilbert and Brock Bowers were the guys that really got the bulk of the targets. But Darnell Washington may be the most physically impressive of the 3 big Georgia tight ends. 6'7", 265-pound, 3-year junior. He was one of the highest rated prospects coming out of high school back in 2020. Absolutely physically imposing. I mean, he's a Madden caricature in a football uniform. I mean, he has got a physique and a build that is just, you don't see every day. Far and away the best Y inline out of a 3-point stance blocker in this draft. There's no one really close. He's better than Meyer. And you would expect him to be his forte at 6'7", 265. If you want a tight end that can block, this is your number 1 tight end on your board. That's without a doubt. He's a vertical field stretcher of a receiver. He can move that body. He can get downfield and make plays. And he's an absolute nightmare and super difficult to stop on crossing routes. And in the flat, I mean, you're going to ask a corner or an inside corner to try to take him down one-on-one. He's going to, if he gets tackled, but he's going to win the battle and probably gain 2-3 extra yards in doing so. Darnell Washington is the type of tight end that the Detroit Lions would look to acquire. And if we were to make a play on a tight end early part of day 2, I think Darnell Washington is one of those players that we should probably take a look at doing so with.
I am with you 100%, Coach. You turned me on to him late in the season, and wow, he just, like you said, he could simply fall forward and he's going to gain a couple extra yards. He's huge, and bottom line is, I'm looking at this through the lens of a Lions fan. I think you've got a pretty decent young pass catching tight end in James Mitchell. You can go get a number 3 tight end through free agency or an undrafted free agent. I mean, they've done that before. Obviously, they can do it again. I love Washington's blocking ability. Quite often, the Lions have employed an additional tackle eligible tight end, and you don't have to do that as often with Mr. Washington on the team. I love him. I think he would bring. And it's not. And again, there's some issues, and I know you're going to touch on them, Coach. But the bottom line is that this guy brings a lot to the table. But there are some concerns. Let's talk about those.
Yeah, well, I mean, he can struggle with leverage and balance just like every other big, long, lanky body style.
Mhm.
And he will struggle with leverage and balance at times. He'll get off balance a little bit and he's just going to end up clasping. And we talked about clasping and grasping Jersey as an offensive tackler and interior offensive lineman. That's holding. I mean, that's sooner or later you're going to get called for it. And it's going to be costly. Um, he's not scheme versatile. This is a Y tight end. So if you're looking to do some other kinds of things with like wing alignment, H alignment, slot alignment, Darnell Washington's probably not your tight end prospect. He's a guy that's got his hand in the dirt on the end of the line of scrimmage, enhancing your offensive tackles. He's a dynamic blocker, but more limited in the receiver. But you know what? In fairness to him, Drew, he just didn't get the targets. It's not that he didn't play. It's not that he, had dropped or just never could get open. They basically ran the offense through Brock Bowers when he was out there, and Eric Gilbert just got more targets than Darnell Washington. So, I mean, to say that he doesn't have the ability to be a dynamic receiver would be extremely unfair. It's just his more limited profile of him as a player. But the blocking alone, I mean, you're really going to get a heck of an enhancement of your offensive line with his ability to block. And he is going to make some plays. And if he's coached up, he could really be a dagger, to defenses with his ability to convert. So I'm big on Darnell Washington. If he's wearing 0 in a Honolulu blue next year, that would be very cool with me.
It would be cool with me, and I'll get real specific. Day one, I don't want the Lions taking the tight end. I don't believe that there's a tight end on the board at this time that's worthy of that spot for the Lions, considering what their needs are in defense. Day two, I'm thinking that second pick in the second round, if Washington's there, that's where it's decision time in my view. Now they may roll the dice and hope he's there in the third round, and he could be, because there's a lot of teams that are going to be turned off on the fact that he didn't put up huge numbers in the offense and that he's not super fast. So everyone wants the next Kyle Pitts or Travis Kelce or Darren Waller, etc. That's not Darnell Washington. But for what a lot of teams need from the position, including the Detroit Lions, he's optimal, and very much a fan of him. Yeah, I'm thinking, Coach, I like him in round 2 for Detroit if it's that second pick. But let's see what happens, right? So we'll look at that. But I mean, there's other guys coming up we're going to talk about right now, and let's just get to it. Dalton Kincaid, the senior out of Utah. Now he's an interesting guy. Let's talk about him.
Well, he's another player, Drew, that has been rumored a Lions target for quite some time.
Very true. Very true.
I think Brad Holmes being out there in Los Angeles and not too far from Salt Lake City probably got to go to, see Kyle Whittingham's Utah Utes football program from time to time and knows the type of players that are produced out of that program. Utah is an extremely underrated football program in our country. We get, further and further away from that Mississippi River, Drew, and us being east of that river, it's all Big Ten and SEC. That's what it seems like we're watching. Like the Big 12 and the Pac-12, we just don't look at it as much. So yeah, I mean, it's not that we don't get to see Utah football, but all they ever are, Drew, are like 10-2 or 9-3. And they're going into the Pac-12 championship game and going to the Rose Bowl. So, I mean, Dalton Kincaid is a big-time player in a big-time program, 6'4", 242. He started his career at the University of San Diego. He was kind of an all-around high school athlete and maybe kind of was avoided a bit from the big football schools at the beginning of his career. Started out at the University of San Diego. He's an excellent receiver.
Oh
He's
yeah.
an excellent receiver. Um, he's got great ball skills and great hands. And that's right there with Michael Mayer. I mean, and Luke Musgrave. He's right there with him. He's as good of a route runner as a tight end as there is in this draft. And that is Michael Mayer's forte. So, again, another great in traffic pass catcher. He's got a very similar receiving profile to Michael Mayer. He's a very aggressive kid. He's got a very physical temperament in the blocking phase. Dalton Kincaid is no tight end prospect to turn your nose up to. This would be a guy on a day two that could be also a good consideration and could very well be ahead of both Darnell Washington and Luke Musgrave as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think Mayer's just a little more polished and more high profile, to be honest. But Kincaid's skill set's similar, and you touched on that. Yeah, if you need a really good pass catching tight end in this draft, yeah, this is probably the next guy you're looking at. He's very skilled. Did get to see a decent amount of Utah football this year, Coach. Actually, even though those late games sometimes on Fox or whatever, but yeah, he's talented, and like you said, that program just keeps winning and going to big bowl games, and he's a big part of that. But there are some concerns, right? Let's talk about those.
Well, for as physical and aggressive as he is, he does lack some strength. He is going to have to get NFL and pro strong. And there are even, like I said, he plays with a great temperament. He's definitely a football player and he brings it. But, because of maybe his body's type, and going against maybe some superior size and athletic ability within that size, he's been out physical. He's been pushed around a little bit. And it's not so much because of him and his, finesse and lack of physicality. It's just because he kind of gets physically owned there. And the weight room and the squat rack are the two, and the sleds are the three biggest friends that Dalton Kincaid can make in order to correct that measure. He plays smaller than Michael Mayer. They're virtually the same size, and he is, he is about 9-10 pounds lighter than Michael Mayer. He's about the same height, but he just plays significantly smaller. Whether it's Mayer's ability to get to certain spots on the field, Mayer's ability to leverage better as a blocker, Mayer's ability to make a play through a linebacker, whatever the case may be. That's probably one of the calling cards Michael Mayer has over Dalton Kincaid. And honestly, if you're looking for a body type and a certain style tight end, okay, Musgrave may be the number 2 or number 3 prospect. But honestly, we're really all said. Dalton Kincaid is probably the number 2 overall best tight end prospect in the 2023 draft.
Yeah, great synopsis. And yes, he can be overpowered. You look at clips and you look at some highlights and you'll see that. But then you also see the spectacular offensive side of it. So again, it really comes down to a team's need. His talent, I agree. He's likely the number 2 most talented tight end in this draft. But if you want a specialized blocker, this isn't your guy. I wouldn't call him an elite receiver, but if you need, like I said, you need a pass catching tight end, you could do far worse than Dalton Kincaid. He's a pretty damn good receiver out of the position, and very versatile in the position in that regard. You can trust him; he's going to make plays, and I think that's a really important thing. Would the Lions consider him? Yeah, of course, I believe they would. The problem I see, and I may be off on this, Coach, but we still got about a couple months till the draft. But right now, the way some of the mocks are falling, he's not going to be there likely at that second pick in the second round. But I'm not sure if I'm Brad Holmes, I'm taking him with that third pick I have, that first second round pick. Not sure about that, but he may be too good to take the chance if you really like him that much. Oh, I just don't see how the Lions can justify taking a tight end in their first 3 picks. It's just my opinion.
It beckons the question: Do you want to replace T.J. Hockenson? Do we need to have T.J. Hockenson again?
The facts and data tell us no, we don't.
So no. So if, like I said, if the stars align great with our first 3 selections, the first 2 first rounders and at pick 48, and somehow Dalton Kincaid is there at 55, okay, I'm good with it. But like I said, if we were to now in getting Darnell Washington, that's not getting TJ Hockenson back. That's getting something different. And so that's why he seems like he'd make a little more sense if we were to go early with a guy. Because I think Dalton Kincaid at his ceiling is TJ Hockenson.
Great point. And like you said, why would you look to take out a guy why would you trade Hockenson and then try to redraft his 2.0? Just doesn't make a lot of sense. Good point. So let's go on to the next prospect, Coach. And this is a guy, interesting guy, Tucker Kraft, the junior out of South Dakota State. Let's talk about him.
He's one of these brethren and a fellow alumni with our good old boy Zach Zenner out of the South Dakota State University Jackrabbits. The 6'5", 255-pound junior he declared from the draft is, the prototype replacement. And I think he was actually a little later than that. But I mean, this is Dallas, Dallas Goedert went to South Dakota State. True. And this is very much Dallas Goedert. That's what Tucker Kraft is. He has excellent size and NFL and the NFL productive frame at 6'5", 255. Really good body control and ball skills. He showed that at the FCS level, and South Dakota State's a premier program at FCS, D1 FCS. And so he got to be showcased quite a bit, and he played against the top FCS teams: North Dakota State, North Dakota, Montana, Northern Iowa. He played against all of those schools. He's most productive in short cross and out routes, which that's great. I mean, that's kind of where we want to put tight ends and backs out of the backfield, kind of in your waggle action, play action pass, those level passing areas. He's going to be able to dominate in certain ones. Very willing and physical blocker as well. That's, not to start talking about, concerns yet. Again, he did play at the FCS level. We didn't see him banging against, SEC West defensive ends and outside linebackers and Big Ten defensive tackles. So he's, that is, one of his drawbacks, but he's very willing and physical in the blocking game. This is a prospect that if he made it to our 3rd round pick, and again, he has a lot of athletic ability. And when you're comparing people to Dallas Goedert, same alma mater, people say he's very, very similar, if not a carbon copy. He may not last to that pick, but he would be definitely one if we have not addressed the position by the 3rd round pick. Tucker Kraft could be somebody of intrigue.
Yeah, and you love that Goddard went to South Dakota State too, because you can at least you have some apples to apples comparisons. Right. Hey, it can be done, and absolutely. I mean, this guy's gifted. You think about even just recently, like Adam Troutman out of Dayton, right? Dayton's not a football school.
Rapids, Michigan.
Yeah, I mean, at Dallas Goedert as well. Tucker Kraft. Here we are. I mean, he has. Physically, he's as good as anybody in terms of being a pass catcher. I would agree with you. The big concern always is the level of competition, Coach. You already touched on that, but there's a couple other issues you'd like to talk about. What are those?
Well, he had some noted drops on easy, uncontested targets. You know, he dropped some easy balls, catchable balls, balls that need to be caught. That is what will get you bounced out of this league in no time. And you'll be playing for Dwayne Johnson or for FoxCareers.com real soon if that's going to be an issue for you. And then you won't be playing for them either. You got to be able to catch the football. He's not a tremendous route runner. You know, his technique is raw. Probably what was asked of him wasn't demanded to be real precise in the route game. You know, he was so physically dominant at that level that simply stretching the field and doing some of the the long routes and downfield routes and just getting him out into a flat so he can wreck people in the open field or in the cross game is all that was demanded from him. And as you know, anybody that's 6'5" or taller, leverage and pad level will be a concern. If he gets high, he's going to get knocked around and stalemated a lot and stood up. So, those are going to be areas of concerns Tucker Kraft is going to have to fight through.
Yeah, and I think, I hate to say this, but I think it's the truth. If Tucker Kraft's from any division, any Power 5 conference, he's probably a late second round pick, maybe in a mid second round pick. The fact that he's not, he still could be, but right. he could slip. He actually could slip to day 3, although I don't see him going out of the 4th round. No way. But if the drops are a big concern, that will happen, I believe. But if he shows out well in the combine and he shows out well at his pro day, which I would expect him to, that'll probably change some things. I don't know, Coach. When you talk about the drops, I mean, is there something to be said that maybe playing at that level at his size, that perhaps the concentration wasn't always there because there wasn't maybe we're looking upfield too quick instead of being ready to take a hit?
That's probably that's a real good point, Drew. He didn't have the concern that he was coming off the field. He was the best tight end they had far and away, and he was going to be on the field. They were going to get the ball to him. Again, they weren't going to just not go away from him because he made a drop, and they went to him so frequently that he's going to have some drops. He's not, where he's a human being. So, again, I am not the most astute South Dakota State Jackrabbit football man. So I can't say that, oh man, he drops the ball too much. It's just something that we've seen a little bit more in film study coming from him than we did with Mr. Kincaid, Mr. Musgrave, Mr. Meyer, and so on.
Yeah, quite frankly, those concerns aren't there with the prospect we talked about before. They are there a bit with Kraft. Not to say he's got hands of stone, but yeah, it's a concern. We
wouldn't talk about him if that was the case, but
exactly.
But yeah, he's profiled a little bit more than maybe some of the other tight end prospects have.
Now, great scouting report there, Coach. Now let's talk about the next. And I like this guy, our next prospect here, Sam Laporta out of Iowa, Coach. Let's talk about him.
Another potential Lion target, really. Mm-hmm. And, well, we've just said, I mean, do you really want to place TJ Hockenson? If you really have to, well, here's the guy you do it with. His replacement in college. Sam Laporta, the senior out of Iowa, tight end university, or the University of Tight End might be the better way of saying it. I know Coach Harbaugh can really say that one time that used to be Stanford, especially when he was there, and that kind of carried on from that point. And he's tried to establish that here a little bit too at U of M. But Iowa, I mean, George Kittle, Noah Fant, TJ Hockenson, I'm not naming them all. There's Iowa is the place for tight ends, and Sam Laporta was absolutely dominant as a tight end at the University of Iowa. 2022 team captain and offensive MVP. He was the mainstay target in the passing game. He doubled the target ratio and the production of any of the next closest receivers in the program. Not just at tight end. We're talking about wide receiver as well.
That's
so
crazy.
This was the guy they threw the football to. Now, it was not a dynamic offense. They struggled mightily on offense. But this is a scheme versatile tight end. He can line up in the Y, the H, the slot. You can move him around the formation and align him differently. Highly competitive blocker. Is played in the Big Ten. That's bang bang football. It's smash mouth ball, and they're one of the programs that really still does it. So he certainly has that in his repertoire. Leverage is seldom an issue. 6'4", 250 or thereabouts. He really can sink his hips well and maintain good leverage. Sam Laporta is legit, and he is going to be drafted, and he's going to be drafted likely on day 2.
Yeah, he's interesting to me, Coach. And the comparisons to Hockenson, even aside, I really like him. But you mentioned Kincaid plays a little small. I see that in Sam Laporta too, and saw that and see that in Hockenson too. They're not small guys, but they play a little more. The way the way they run, it's more finesse, and really they're better pass route runners than most, but they tend to get a little low when they're running, and I think that's how that look is. But I love Laporta catching the football. I think if he's there in the 3rd round, and I think he will be, and if the Lions didn't go with Washington in round 2, I wouldn't mind seeing Sam Laporta in round 3. At least right now, I really do like him. Now, I know there are some issues there, and you touched a little bit. You talked about he's a willing blocker, but there are some concerns about his blocking. What are your concerns, Coach?
Well, when you're getting a little bit down the prospect line here, some athletic ability is going to be diminishing here when we start talking about prospects this far down the line. And that's probably certainly the case with Sam Laporta. Physical and functional strength is going to be an indictment. It's got to get better. He's just, not at that level. He is going to struggle, maintaining blocks. He's going to struggle moving people. His physicality and his willingness will be stalemated and kind of, packed up for him if he can't physically hang with these guys. He's dropped a fair amount of balls. Again, very much probably like Tucker Kraft, Drew. The kid was throwing the football, it seemed like every other pass play. Or more, maybe like 2 or 3 out of 5 were going to him. So when you're getting the ball thrown to you that much, you're going to drop a few balls, but he's dropped a few balls that were very catchable. His athleticism, could be exposed a little bit if you're going to feature him and put him in matchups that are going to be where his strength is kind of countered, or somebody's much faster and you've got a bracket scheme against him that's with some real quick and physical defensive backs and linebackers. That could be trouble for him. He could find the sledding pretty tough as a blocker as well against certain kind of defenses that really are strong and really fast. So those are some things that probably have Sam Laporta trending in the 50 to 125 range as far as draft slot. Probably much later than 50. We're probably talking more, 3rd round and later. But I would be shocked if he made it deep into the 4th round. I really would be. I think he's still just how productive he was. He's somebody that's going to be a good tight end 2 or 3. Really in his rookie.
too talented to slip out of the fourth round. I think there would have to be an underlying issue that that no one's aware of at this point that would impact his draft status at this point in terms of where he's slotting out. I agree with you, Coach. Can't see him getting out of the fourth round, and very likely is a day 2 guy. But let's talk about another prospect, Coach, coming up here. Our last one for depth, and it's Cameron Latu out of Alabama, the redshirt senior. Redshirt senior, but you never question Alabama prospects, right, Coach? Let's talk about him.
No, 5 years in that program will do a young man good, Drew. And Cameron Latu, played 5 years for Nick Saban down at Tuscaloosa, Alabama, at the University of Alabama. 6'5", 244-pounder, came in as a defensive player. Started off on the other side of the football, and so it shows that he has premier athletic ability if he's playing defensive end for Alabama. So he's a premier athlete, highly touted in regards to his studying and studious aspects to the game. Very good football IQ. Played on both sides of the football, has good knowledge of both sides of the football. And he understands what a defensive end wants to do too, from the tight end perspective, which is very helpful to him, and how he attacks each play and within the scheme. Got good hands, dependable. Again, wasn't a feature in the Alabama offense. Tight ends typically aren't. But Cameron Latu is definitely someone that, again, certain GMs and scouting departments could have him higher on the board than what we're featuring him as. We are featuring him as a 3rd to 5th round pick, likely a day 2 guy. This is a player I think it could really kind of fall into the no man's land of the Lions draft picks, where we don't have that 4th rounder. So that kind of could be the area and where he goes. And that could make him difficult to get. But if he somehow slipped to 153 or 154, whichever one that is, boy, would he be an interesting prospect.
You bring up an excellent point, Coach. If all things being equal and the Lions had a 4th round pick, this is someone I'm targeting right here. If he's there, I grab him. They don't. So I don't see Latu on the Lions' radar, or he won't be there by the time day 3 they're picking again. I'll say that right now. And I don't see him beating out any of the other prospects we've already mentioned. Now, I will say this: he's rocked up. I mean, he is like you said, he's an athlete. But there are some issues on in his game, and I know you're going to touch on those in a second. But I really do like this guy, and like you said, he was obviously not the premier or primary target in the Alabama offense by any means, but that doesn't mean he's not a very capable pass catcher. He is. But talk about some of the issues with his game.
Well, he got moved to the tight end for a reason, and I'm guessing he probably the quickness and speed and some of the true athleticism, it really takes him. That twitch isn't quite there. So we're not talking about a burner, and probably the athletic profile slides back a little bit from some of the other prospects that we've mentioned. He's a possession receiver. He is not a guy that's going to, be some sort of over the top or, post corner, flag routes, zone, or a red zone threat. This is a guy that, is going to make the meat and potatoes catches for you, and that's about it. So he's not a very dynamic receiver. Probably a little bit more blocker than receiver. But, he's not anywhere on Darnell Washington's level either. So, as far as physical dominance. So, that's kind of where Cameron is a little more limited.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And I think at the end of the day, probably not going to be a Lion. Not that we don't like him. We do like him. It's just the way the Lions picks are slotted and where it looks like he's slotting might not be a fit there. But again, this is a very talented tight end. I think this is somebody that if he's able to work with another veteran guy and really kind of learn some of the tricks, because realistically, if he's able to use his physicality very effectively in the red zone, and I think he can, learn some of those veteran tricks and getting open, because he's certainly strong enough and big enough to do it. No, he's not gonna beat most of the receivers on the field in the 100-yard dash, but that's okay because he can do other things really well. So interesting prospect. I do like him a lot. Coach, I know we're near the end here, but we do have some other prospects we want to touch on. And I know you've got a couple favorites here. Who'd you have in mind?
Well, these are players that I think, once we hit day 3, we've got 3 picks on day 3.
Yes, that's correct.
This is an area where we could feature tight end, and I think there are some guys that we certainly could consider. Brenton Strange out of Penn State is kind of a borderline guy. I mean, he is athletic, and he did some things for James Franklin over at Penn State in the passing game that were pretty impressive as a tight end. He is a player worth mentioning. Davis Allen, big 6'6", 250-pounder, played at both Clemson and Missouri. Another intriguing guy, kind of reminds a lot of people of Zach Gentry, that played for Michigan and is now a Pittsburgh Steeler there with Pat Freiermuth, who you mentioned earlier in the episode. Mm-hmm. One of our local guys, Luke Schoonmaker, one of those Michigan tight ends. He could be of intrigue. He's the perfect, tight end 2, tight end 3, kind of the position he played at Michigan, basically. Zach Kuntz is a big old kid, man. He's 6'8", 245-pounder out of Old Dominion. There's some catch point strengths there that I think people probably could see pretty well. Will Mallory of the famed Mallory family. Grandpa was the head coach at the University of Indiana. Dad and uncle were all Michigan Wolverines and coached in college in the NFL. He was a highly coveted prospect coming out of high school, 6'5", 245-pounder out of the U. He's certainly going to get his look. Josh Weil, we just saw Travis Kelce do his thing. Guys like Zach Ertz, other tight ends, that are similar to Josh Weil's profile. Big kid, 6'6", 245 out of Cincy. He's getting his look. You got a Spartan, Daniel Barker, 6'4", 250. And then one that's really, really kind of a tight end, kind of an H slot type tight end, kind of the exact opposite of Darnell Washington, is former University of Alabama tight end 1 and played some tight end for Texas last year. Jaleel Billingsley, not a real big guy, 6'4", 219, 220 pounds, but someone that really can stretch the field and do some things dynamically in the pass game.
He's an interesting guy. That side, he probably fits in very well for a team that runs more of a spread or RPO style offense. No question about that. I am interested in him. Schoonmaker is interesting to me, Coach, and not just because he's local, but I always liked him there at Michigan, and I think he could be a surprise in this draft as well. Definitely day 3, but he could make someone very happy. But Zach Kuntz from Old Dominion's a guy I'm intrigued with. Just strictly for his size. I haven't admittedly not seen much of him, but I'm really curious to see how his pro day go. And I'm assuming he's going to be at the combine, I would think. So we're looking forward to seeing him as well. No question about that. Coach, wrapping this one up. Tight end class overall, I mean, pretty deep. I wouldn't say spectacular, but deep.
Fair, a fair summation there, Drew. I'm not sure that we have a prospect that's going to be a top 10 player like we do in some years. Certainly top 20, very possibly. And that would be Michael Mayer. When we get to the 20s, I think we will have a tight end picked, or will have had one picked. And then once we get 30 and beyond, that's when we're going to start seeing tight ends pop up a little bit more. I think there's several tight ends that are going to be long-term pros and could have very, very nice careers. There's some that could be Pro Bowl caliber, and the guy that you want to have on your fantasy roster. And there's going to be some that, we will be watching play for, the XFL or the USFL as well. So it's an interesting position group. We probably have had deeper pools of talent at this position group, but it's a pretty deep from top to bottom group as well, as you mentioned.
Yeah, I agree. And I think from the Lions perspective, I'm pretty much resigned that they're going to draft somebody. So to me, if you're going to do that, then make it someone worth your while, like a Washington or Laporta in the late second or maybe that third round. I just don't think draft capital for the Lions in the first round at all should be considered for a tight end, just because it's just that, again, how did they play after Hockenson was traded?
Right.
Again, not a knock on him. It's just they're a pretty good offensive team. They have a lot of weapons. They don't have to rely strictly on one guy, and it certainly isn't going to be a tight end. So Meyer's probably out of the picture, right? Yeah. And then and for the Lions, I mean, that's not an option, but everyone else is in play. So again, we're going to trust Brad Holmes. I would think his track record over the last 2 years, just with the Lions alone, I think have earned him some of that trust from us as Lions fans, even though we're long-suffering fans. But I think he's earned that, and we're going to see another great draft, and likely a Lion. Like one of these guys is going to be a Lion, and that's great, because it's only going to make this team better. And they do need help at tight end. They don't necessarily need an elite tight end though. But for Coach Andy Shield, the Marine City Mariners, I'm Drew. Thank you, everybody, for watching and listening. Appreciate the support, and we will talk to you next week as our draft prospect coverage continues. So thank you, everybody.